so often the default position is that technology is neutral, use it for good, don't use it for bad, and then stop talking about it. What I'm usually focused on is how I would say that technology is good and that it's something that God has given us and it commanded us to do. If you use a shovel, you can use it for good ends or bad ends, but your hands get chafed while you're using that, so you get blisters and calluses. So we know in the physical realm that if we do something repeatedly, that our body will change in response. But we're less able to do that is to say that's true of our minds. The deeper kind of formative question is, it seems like almost all the theology bots have turned into therapy bots. That shift in what it means to have a relationship, I think, is probably more significant than actually the answer itself.
Hi, welcome to the Global Missional AI podcast, where faith meets technology and we'll re-explore how innovation can serve the kingdom of God. My name is Joshua Seal, and I'm the director of Global Missional AI. Our guest today is Dr. John Dyer, a professor of educational technology and theology at Dallas Theological Seminary, who brings essential theological depth to our understanding of artificial intelligence. John has been at the forefront of thinking about how Christians should engage with technology for over a decade, challenging the default assumption that technology is simply neutral. What makes John's perspective particularly valuable is his understanding that technology is fundamentally formative, not just instrumental. As he puts it, whenever we use any technology, we don't just change the world, we get changed too. This insight becomes crucial when we consider AI systems can empathize with us, respond to our deepest questions, and potentially reshape how we think about relationships, wisdom, and even our understanding of what it means to be human. Before we begin, a quick word from our partner, Glue. Glue is the technology platform for the faith ecosystem, providing value-aligned AI and comprehensive solution for ministry leaders. We're grateful to Glue for helping enable the Global Missional AI Summit and this first season of the Missional AI podcast. Visit gloo.com to learn more about their tools and resources. And speaking of theological engagement with technology, we're excited to continue to announce our upcoming Global Missional AI London event, which is happening next week in London on July 17th. There will be theologians, practitioners gathering to explore how Scripture informs our approach to artificial intelligence. Dr. John Lennox of Oxford University, Richard Susskind, Albert Beher, James Poulter, Eric Saucier will all be speaking. We're really excited to be hosting this event next week. There's still time to register. We encourage you to find out more and register at missional.ai. Let's dive into the conversation with Dr. John Dyer from Dallas Theological Seminary.
My name is John Dyer. I work at Dallas Theological Seminary in educational technology, but I'm also a theology professor. And so I get to teach there, and I have a lot of little side projects like Best Commentaries and Worship.ai and Y'all Version and things like that.
John, thank you very much for being here with us for a conversation around a topic that I feel entirely unqualified to talk about, which is the theological aspect of this artificial intelligence. You've been writing about this subject for some time, but for maybe those who are less familiar with you, just give us a little summary of some of the thinking that you've been doing into this subject.
Yeah, I mean, I usually like to just start with that broader perspective about technology, just because I think so often the default position is that technology is neutral, use it for good, don't use it for bad, and then stop talking about it. So as long as we're doing morally good things and not morally bad things, we should stop talking about it. What I'm usually focused on is how I would say that technology is good and that it's something that God has given us and it commanded us to do. And so it's not just something that's optional, it's something that we are made to make things from what God's made. But then on the flip side, whenever we use any technology, we always get changed too. So we change the world, but we always get, we kind of adapt to it over time. And sometimes those adaptations are really good and sometimes they're not so good. So when we think about, AI specifically, I think I usually focus in on that concept of the image of God. What are the aspects of that? And then how does our understanding of that alter and change as we begin to interact with AI more?
I've been having this conversation with folks more learned than me, and certainly you fit into that category, about the tool argument. Last year we had a number of conversations with Dr. John Lennox, thinking with him about what does it mean for AI to not just be a tool, that it isn't necessarily as neutral as we might feel, because it feels that it's different. This technology that can respond to us in ways, it's not just always prompted by us, and certainly in an agentic future, it begins to offer up its own moral framework and ethics and opinion. How are you thinking about the argument of AI just being a tool? Is that a fair characterization.
Yeah, well, I don't think that anything is just a tool in that sense. So, like, I would say, the example I gave on the stage was, if you use a shovel, you can use it for good ends or bad ends, but your hands get shaped while you're using that, so you get blisters and calluses. And when you go to the gym, those tools are all marked, and they all say, if you do this repeatedly, your arm will change.
Right.
If you do this repeatedly, your legs will change. So we know in the physical realm that if we do something repeatedly, that our body will change in response. What we're less able to do that is to say that's true of our minds, but also that's true, I think, of our sort of souls and relationality, and even I think our sense of wisdom. So, the shift from having access to information versus it being sort of internalized. Yeah. Sometimes I think when we think, oh, well, just get the task done, the task goes faster, but then we become less, I think sometimes. That's not an argument to never use technology. It's just to be aware of what skills and abilities are we ceding over to a tool, and then thinking, so who do I actually want to become, not just what do I want to do? And I think AI is particularly important there because it relates to both our mental ability and I think our relational ability, just because it's so good at empathizing with us, I think.
And so if these tools are not necessarily as benign as we might think of them, and obviously we know from examples that we've seen both here on the stage at Missional AI and in the literature over the past couple of years, that not all of the models do exhibit necessarily a Christian worldview when prompted, although they can be made to look like they exhibit such a view. How do you go around thinking what it might look like to have a more Christian version of an artificial intelligence in the world?
Well, I do think this is probably one of the key examples. Sometimes over the years, Christians have tried to develop Christian alternatives to other things that are out there. There's Christian Facebooks and Christian YouTubes and those things. I don't know that those are necessarily things that we need, but I could see a case for a more Christian LLM that's going to answer things in the way that we want to answer them. So that's on that kind of direct moral part of it, that it's going to answer questions about suicide or sexuality in ways that we would be compatible with. But I think the deeper kind of formative question is, it seems like almost all the theology bots have turned into therapy bots. So people, that are creating them, usually, if I was going to create one, I would think people are going to ask about, did Adam have a belly button? And, am I really predestined? And all these kind of complex issues. It seems like people actually ask about, how do I forgive my cheating spouse? What do I do about? And so that formation of going to a device that is constantly patient, always on, that shift in what it means to have a relationship, I think, is probably more significant than actually the answer itself, but about who we go to.
The work you've done and the communities that you roll in are full of leaders, often not with a particularly technological outlook, either academically or they're working in ministry in some contexts. How well prepared do you think the general leader, the lay person, or someone working in the academic space is to contend with some of these issues that are emerging? I often use the example of when a young person comes to their youth worker or youth leader or pastor and says, hey, I've fallen in love with this chatbot. What do I do? How well prepared are people for that?
Gosh, no, it's going so fast. I mean, there's not a class on AI chatbot relationships in seminary. And so we're all having to adapt really fast. And I think we're even having to think about, what skills do I want to develop in a school setting and what things do I want to seed to AI? So we're moving really fast, and I think trying to do things outside of the classroom. And then even for, the seminary where I work, and we're doing a lot of work around what do we think our proper use of AI is. It's one thing to just say students don't use it, but for example, we're doing a lot of multilingual work and having a Spanish and Chinese and Arabic program, and saying, how much of those AI dubbing things do we want to use, and how much of that is that cultural appropriation? Is that just content dumping? And then are we turning seminary into just a content farm instead of a place that's deeply formative? So we're asking those questions internally as well.
I mean, the academic setting is one which has really had to contend with this issue over the past couple of years. Pat Gelsinger from Glue here on the stage today talking about his own kids worrying about whether or not they're cheating using AI in their own academic work. And I think of my own children who are much younger, but are already being asked to come home and do homework using things like Gemini overview answers and things like that. How is it shaping the way in which you think about how we form that next generation of learners in this space? And what would you like to see happen to make that a more fair and equitable experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of we'll sometimes display like a competency framework where you start out with a really low skill, you learn a little bit of skill, and you get better to where you become an expert. And there's some kind of magic place in there where I think you can introduce AI. So when it comes to, say, a calculator, we don't give calculators to kindergartners because we need them to learn those fundamentals first. But if we don't give calculators to high school students, I think we're harming them as well. So somewhere in there, it takes a lot of wisdom to know what that is. And it seems like the last maybe 20 years, we've thought, let's just throw technology at education and make it better, and it hasn't.
No.
And so there's a lot of data that would say we need to go back to paper books and human conversation. But that's not to say that we should never use AI and that we should never use, say, projectors and things like that. So I think we need to be really rigorous in our data to say what are the actual outcomes when it comes to education versus what are our tech companies selling us, and that we need to be really careful there. So I would say, to most people, I would say encourage you to build that foundational skill and then accelerate with AI rather than replace with AI. Some things I think it's probably fine to do that with, but there may be some fundamental areas that you want to get good at, and that's going to require that 10,000 hours.
Of course, and that learning experience mounts up over time and can be deployed as skills. The thing that I've been interested in is many of the applications of this more Christian-aligned technology that we're seeing, and AI and faith-aligned technology, is in the study of the Bible. We see that there's a huge opportunity for that as a way of making more interactive experiences or ones that are more discursive. The particular feature, maybe some might say it's a bug that keeps occurring, is essentially chatbots modeled after different corpuses of information. Do I want to go and talk to a C.S. Lewis bot or a G.K. Chesterton bot or an entity maybe even that replicates one of the apostles or one of the minor prophets or something like that? How do you feel about that in terms of the shaping of our interaction with this obviously fantastic literature from church history and from the Bible itself, but it is in a different form and not necessarily a form that was intended by the original writers, authors, or necessarily in the way that God intended it? Yeah,
I'm a little hesitant on those people didn't get the chance to consent on that. So I think there's an example right now of Alistair Begg, a living person who wrote a devotional and is lending his voice to spit that out. And there he's consenting, and I think that's great. But I don't know that it's that great to do it in the other way with a non-consenting author. I mean, it's kind of fun to do. I mean, it really is a blast to ask C.S. Lewis about things, and I've tried those. I'm not sure what sort of long-term value that is, just because I do think, again, you need to be able to absorb some information into yourself to get wisdom. And so the old story that Socrates stole about writing, we know this story so well, is that writing was going to make people not have wisdom. And I think we continually are wrestling with that, of how much to offload to a machine. But then when it comes to this representative power of another author's ideas, I think we all know that it's not really real. And I think we're okay with it. But really, it's like, what is the goal of that thing? What are we really trying to do with it, other than sometimes technology is just, let's see if we can do it, and that's fun. But at some point we need to come up with a better goal than just if we can.
Well, so to think about what is permissible and what is not, standards becomes an obvious topic here. We've been working obviously at Glue and through AI and Faith and others on the flourishing standards and thinking about what that looks like. When you think more broadly about what does it look like to have a theological framework for AI, is there some set of standards that you fall back to regularly to say, well, these are some of the non-negotiables?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think most of the things that we see in these standards, I think really reflect biblical frameworks. Even the ones that are coming from secular companies. I think for the Department of Defense has one. I think they're all really trying to talk about things like equity and things like fairness, things like transparency. So I think those values are there. I shared earlier, but just a fun little passage from Deuteronomy that has this passage about when you build a house, you have a responsibility to build a parapet around the top of it. And I think it's just a good example of the Bible saying that yes, we should be building, but we also have a responsibility to be thinking about some of both the explicitly bad uses, but also sometimes the accidental things that can happen, like falling off of a roof. And so I really appreciate what Glue and Faith Tech and Praxis and all these different groups are doing. I think that they're doing a great job at this point.
When you look forward to the future, it's hard to predict where this stuff goes, but I referenced in my own talk while we were here as well about the AI 2027 paper that's just been released, and there's a lot of thinking about how fast we may see a major acceleration happening in the next couple of years. How do you think that might change your own views around the role that AI plays in our experience?
I mean, like you said, it's very rapid development, and we're all trying to kind of predict where the things are going to go. And in my mind, the thing that I think is helpful is maybe to think about, the base technology of the internet, and then that took about 10 or 12 years to get the phone. So the internet was this awesome technology that companies used, but the phone is when it got into the individual, regular everyday consumer's life and really changed them. I think we're kind of at that stage with AI where it's now released to the public, but it's not really that present. And I really do think that the robot era, and when there's some type of anthropomorphic animal type thing that you can interact with, I think that's really what will be the big change. So there's a lot of technology that has to happen. The AI has to get better, and so does all the sort of animatronic stuff. But I really think that when we're regularly interacting with something that feels like a being and not just an online thing, that will be the next big leap.
So we've talked about tools. We worry about them becoming weapons. Do you worry about the future of society where we kind of put AI on the throne instead?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that there's a lot of desire to have humans in the loop. So I'm not necessarily worried about sort of Terminator scenarios in that way. I mean, it's certainly possible. I mean, I think we're all glad that we know that God will come back at some point and that will end in a good way. But and it could go bad or positive in the intervening areas, but I don't see it doing that so much as just sort of changing the way we think about ourselves, and the way we think about God, and the way we think about relationships. And as we shift to using more and more AI interaction, our ability to listen, our ability to empathize, we may shift as beings. That's probably more what I'm concerned with.
And so you're hopeful?
Yeah, I think so. Overall, I think that the ending will be good, and so in between it may have some ups and downs.
Well, that's a good ending, I think, to end on. John, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us this
Absolutely.
afternoon.
Thanks for having me.